Shalom, families. I hope you're having a beautiful week. Shalom to all my children. I'm not going to sing the Shalom song today because that's going to be a little different. Technically, we would be done with Hebrew school by now. But because everything went a little not quite as planned this year, I would like to enjoy with everybody another story time. Hopefully, I can keep doing these as long as you'd like to see them. I'm going to pick a book to read to you for the weekend, just that might speak to you during this time, and just to have a few minutes to relax and hear a story maybe about Jewish ethics, folklore, holidays. We do have another holiday coming up that we will talk about next week. And for right now, I just would like to enjoy a seasonal book and with the little topics afterwards. And I'll also be linking in the email I send a great craft project to do that relates to the book as well as this time of year. So stay tuned and you'll see why I think this craft project might be an easy one for you to accomplish. But for right now, let's start out by introducing the book. It's called King Solomon and the Bee, and I'm sure most of my kids remember at least hearing about King Solomon, and you will learn a lot more about King Solomon in your studies. But for right now, this book, we will just mention that it does relate to a real person, but this book is based on Jewish folklore and more around the Talmud. So I know we talk a lot about the Torah in kindergarten. Soon you're going to start learning about a book called the Talmud, which is actually a compilation or a book that has a lot of stories that rabbis have told, speeches, theories, or discussions from rabbis. It also has a lot about Jewish ethics, so it's not quite like the Torah, where it's a lot of stories that have been handed down, but it's very important to the Jewish people, and it's a book you will be learning about and hearing about for quite a while. So this book is generally based on stories from that. King Solomon and the Bee. Plus, I just love the illustrations of this book. We love our artwork in kindergarten, so don't you love these colors? I think it's just beautiful. So part of Jewish ethics discussed in the Talmud is about the treatment of animals and consideration for all of God's creatures. So let's see how we can think about treating all of God's creatures and how that relates in this book. King Solomon was the wisest and smartest king of his days. Not only could the king speak every language in the world, he could also talk to the animals. I see a lot of animals here. Which one's your favorite? I've always loved elephants, but my goodness, isn't that peacock gorgeous? And then we have a gorgeous horse, a camel, an ostrich, a giraffe, a beautiful bird. Could that possibly be a hummingbird? We see a lot of birds around here, and especially hummingbirds this time of year. I've noticed a lot of them on my morning walks. And a bee. I wonder if that's the bee we'll hear more about. The king lived in a big palace surrounded by a magnificent garden where beautiful flowers grew. Look at all those pretty flowers. Gardens. When it was hot in the palace, King Solomon was in the habit of taking his afternoon nap under the shade of a broadleaf fig tree in his garden. Do we see the garden? Oop, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Oh, he's sleeping under the tree. One day, while the king was sleeping under the tree, a young bee flew into the garden. It flew from one pretty flower to another. When it had enough, the bee decided to rest and landed on all the king's nose. This tickled the king. Half asleep, he raised his hand. The hand frightened the bee, and the bee stung his nose. Oh no, have any of you been stung by a bee? didn't feel good. It hurt. The pain woke King Solomon up as his nose became swollen and the pain grew worse. His rage mounted. "What insect dared to sting the king's nose?" he shouted. As his nose became redder and grew to be as big as a cucumber, he commanded with fury, "All bees, hornets, wasps, and flies, appear immediately before me." Do you think they listened? They know he's the king, right? From every hive and nest, from near and far, swarms of bees, hornets, wasps, and flies flew in a panic to the king's garden. They were all buzzing in confusion when King Solomon shouted, "Silence!" A hush fell upon all. Pointing to his nose, the king roared, "Who among you dared to do a thing like this to the king?" Nobody moved. Nobody buzzed. "Who among you dared to do a thing like this to the king?" Solomon repeated. Finally, a small bee flew straight to him and said, "I am the one, my lord." My king, before the king had time to get angry and punish the bee, it pleaded, "Oh, my lord, my king, please don't be angry. I am young and foolish bee. I have not yet learned the difference between a flower and a nose, or between one nose and another, especially the nose of my lord, my king, a nose with a rose-like fragrance and a banana-like grace." Are those compliments you'd like to hear, or do you think that might be a compliment because it came from a bee? As the bee talked, a faint smile grew on King Solomon's face. The bee gathered more courage and continued, "I have sinned, my lord, my king, and I am sorry. Do not be angry with me. Do not punish me. Who knows? Maybe one day, my lord, my king, I will be able to repay you with a favor." King Solomon burst out laughing. "You, a little creature like you, will repay the king?" He laughed so much he could not talk anymore. He just motioned the little bee and all the other insects to fly away. When the king stopped laughing, his servant put ointment on his nose, and soon the pain and swelling went away. Before long, the king forgot all about the bee. Look at him laughing at that little bee. Look how big that bump is on his nose. Oh no. But sometimes there's ointment that makes you feel all better. And he was able to forget. The bee made him laugh, huh? One day, the Queen of Sheba came to the palace to visit King Solomon. Look at all the animals and goodies the queen is bringing. She had heard how smart the king was, and in order to test him, she had brought with her all sorts of difficult riddles, puzzles, and questions. One by one, she presented them to the king, and one by one, he solved them. The time came for the last test. The queen brought to the throne room several of her young maidens. Each of them held a bouquet of beautiful flowers. "Before you, O King Solomon, and the hands of the maidens are bouquets of flowers. Only one of them is made up of real flowers. The rest of the flowers are all made by human hands. Do, O King, tell me, which is which?" They all look beautiful. I would love any of those flowers. But do you think they all smell beautiful if they're not all real? Let's find out. The man-made flowers looked so perfect, so much like flowers of the fields and gardens, that the king could not tell them apart. He looked and he looked some more, and still could not tell them apart. The king was ready to give up when he heard a faint buzz outside the window. He was the only one who heard it. When the king saw a little bee, his eyes lit up. "Open the window," he told the servant. "Be quick." Do you see the bee out there waiting to get in? The window was opened. Without anybody else noticing, the bee flew in and headed straight for one bouquet. The king smiled and pointed to the bouquet where the bee settled. "That is a bouquet of real flowers," he exclaimed, to the amazement of the Queen of Sheba and her maidens. And that is how the little bee repaid the king. So the Torah teaches us that we must not cause pain and suffering to any creatures in this world. How do you see this helping your life every day? Do you maybe have pets? Because the Torah also talks about that we are supposed to feed our animals or our pets. If you have a dog, a cat, maybe a fish, we're supposed to feed them before we feed ourselves. So that's part of the Talmud's rabbinic laws and customs that we know as Jewish people. So I want to challenge you this week at home to see how you might be able to help your pets. What can you do to show the ethics as a Jewish person of being kind to animals? Do you think you could remember to feed your dog or your cat right when you wake up in the morning? I challenge you to do that this week. And then how can we show it outside the home to other animals? Maybe there's animals in your neighborhood. I know in my neighborhood we actually see squirrels, we see rabbits, we see furry critters. There's also snakes near the mountains and all kinds of birds in the air. And yes, of course, bees. So how can we help all of the animals and the critters, and how can we do good in our world? Another question that maybe you could talk to your parents about is, it seemed like King Solomon spoke to the bee. He understood what the bees were saying. And when he commanded the bees and the flies to come to him, they all came right away, didn't they? So, do you think they understood what he was saying too? If you could talk to the animals in your neighborhood or in your house, although I think I already talked to my dog plenty, and I do believe my dog understands every word I say. If you could talk to all the animals, though, maybe an animal you don't know personally, and believe that they understand you, what do you think you would say to animals? Do you think you would ask them what they truly need, what they want, how you could help them maybe? What sort of conversation could you have with the animals? On that, I am going to leave you to talk to your parents and say, Shalom. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you enjoyed this story, and look for the email with a craft suggestion attached to it related to this book, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.